Chosen one, this is a declaration of a truth that has survived every difficult season of your life. You are here because your purpose always finds its way home, but first we must acknowledge the battlefield. Those who smiled while setting traps built entire strategies around you, never waking up, yet they failed. They did this thinking you were naive, but you showed them who's the boss. You walked into a situation, a relationship, a room, a season of your life, carrying exactly who you are. Warm, genuine, feeling things deeply, extending grace freely, leading with a kind of presence that most people have to manufacture, but that flows naturally from you. And someone watched that. Someone studied you, the way a predator studies a situation before deciding to move. And they made a calculated decision. They decided you were the target. This is the first revelation in a story full of them. They chose you, not because you were weak, but because you were bright. Manipulators specifically seek out people they perceive as too generous, too warm, too giving. They pass over the guarded ones. They pass over the ones already broadcasting a clear signal to keep their distance. The person they circle is always the one actively making everyone in the room feel comfortable, the one who notices when someone feels left out, who gives without being asked, who leads with care as an instinct rather than a performance. In their mind, a person that generous with energy must be hungry for the warmth returned. A person that giving must be afraid of losing connection. They looked at your openness and decided it was an unlocked door. They misread every single thing about you. What looks like people-pleasing on the surface is, in a chosen one, something categorically different. It is not neediness, it is nature. You extend warmth because you are genuinely built for connection, not because you are afraid of rejection. You give because your capacity is large, not because you are trying to earn your place in any room. That distinction is fundamental, and it is the one they missed entirely. They constructed their whole strategy on a misdiagnosis. They saw your light and called it an easy win. What they were actually standing in front of was a warning they did not have the wisdom to read. You felt something shift the moment they decided to come for you, not analytically, in your gut, in that deep knowing place that has never once lied to you. The energy changed before a single word was spoken. You registered it. You filed it quietly and completely, without telling anyone. And the real game, the one they never knew was happening, began right there, not with you as the victim, with you already awake, already watching, already several steps ahead of someone who believed they were the only one playing. Hold that image. The hunter who does not know they are being watched. They were convincing. Credit where it is due. They ran their approach with confidence because they had run it successfully before. They deployed manufactured warmth and calculated closeness. They delivered flattery, timed precisely to the moments when self-doubt might be quietly creeping in. They wove guilt into ordinary conversation so skillfully that it barely registered as guilt at all. They performed loyalty beautifully, right up until the moment real loyalty would have cost them something. But you were paying close attention the entire time. Here is what they fundamentally misunderstood about your emotional intelligence. It is not simply the ability to feel, it is the ability to decode. While they were busy performing care, performing loyalty, performing concern, you were translating every performance into usable information. The compliment that always carried a subtle hook at the end. The apology that never once produced a change in the behavior it claimed to address. The warmth that felt slightly rehearsed, like a line delivered too many times to sound spontaneous. Every inconsistency was filed away, not in a notebook, but in your spirit, in that internal archive that never forgets and never distorts. They thought they were reading you. You were reading them. They thought they were setting the pace. You were letting them set it, because the faster they moved, the more they exposed themselves. The flattery always carried a quiet sting, a subtle comparison, an implication that you still needed something only they could provide. The loyalty evaporated the exact moment it would have cost them anything real. The guilt was never spoken directly. It lived in references to sacrifice, in reminders of what had been given, in the low-grade suggestion that you were always slightly in debt and never quite catching up. You recognized every tactic for exactly what it was, a control mechanism, a leash dressed up as affection, and you said nothing. Not because you were confused, because you were not finished watching. Chosen ones do not move when they are reactive, they move when they are certain. And with every interaction, your certainty was growing stronger. Everyone focuses on what it feels like to be targeted, but chosen ones do something specific in the middle of that experience that separates them from nearly everyone else. They run their own test quietly, in the background, where no one can see it happening. While the other person was testing your patience, you were testing their character. While they were pushing limits to see what they could extract, you were extending grace to see if they would recognize it and rise. You were not passive. You were conducting the most important evaluation of the entire situation. You were watching to see whether something real existed underneath the performance, something worth staying for, something that would actually grow if given the room to breathe. You extended genuine chances, not out of desperation, not because you had stopped seeing what was happening, but because you are the kind of person who needs to know completely, without any remaining doubt, that every door of redemption was opened before the chapter was closed. That quality is not a flaw. That is integrity operating at a level most people never reach. If you felt the truth in these words, hype this video so more chosen ones like you can see it. What your evaluation revealed was impossible to misread. Every chance you extended was absorbed without acknowledgement. Every demonstration of grace was interpreted as evidence that the line could be moved further. Every display of patience was treated as a green light to escalate. The character underneath the performance was not developing, it was getting bolder and less careful. And with every escalation, the picture forming in your spirit became more complete and more undeniable. What also deserves to be said is that staying while fully knowing is not free. It carries a real cost. Holding the truth you have already gathered while continuing to show up with grace requires a kind of strength that most people are never asked to develop. The weight you carried in that season was not the weight of confusion, it was the weight of clarity. Managing your own emotional response to what you were witnessing, choosing the right moment to act rather than reacting from feeling, maintaining composure in a situation that was anything but normal, that is sophisticated, disciplined, high-level inner work. It was done in silence, without any audience, and without a single moment of applause. That discipline did not disappear when the season ended. It became the foundation of everything you are building now. The version of you being quietly forged in that silence was the most powerful thing they never saw coming. They needed you to snap. This has to be fully understood. Every provocation, every escalation, every strategically placed jab was an investment in the moment you would finally lose control and hand them the narrative they needed. They needed you to become the volatile one, the irrational one, the one who could not hold it together. That story would have justified everything done to you and everything they planned to do next. You gave them nothing, not because you did not feel it. The betrayal sat in your chest like fire. The disrespect burned in ways that never showed on your face. You felt every single thing, but you carry something they cannot access. The ability to feel the full weight of a situation and still choose, deliberately and consciously, how you respond to it. You can stand at the absolute edge of your limit and still choose power over performance, so you stayed quiet, not as surrender, as warfare. Strategic silence is one of the most destabilizing things you can deploy against someone who feeds on your chaos. A person without access to your reaction has no real next move. Every tool in their kit requires your engagement to function. The guilt trip needs your guilt to carry any weight. The silent treatment needs your anxiety to have any leverage. The false accusation needs your defense to seem worth making in the first place. The moment you stopped engaging, every single one of their tools became useless at the same time. They pushed harder, and you got stiller. They escalated, and you observed. They baited, and you gave them nothing to work with. With every failed attempt to provoke a response, something happened that they had not accounted for. They began to crack. Not all at once. Gradually, they got louder and messier. They overplayed their hand. They said things that revealed far more than they intended to reveal. They contradicted earlier versions of their own stories because they were no longer carefully tracking the construction. The performance that had previously seemed seamless started developing visible holes that others could see. You watched all of it with the same composed expression you had worn from the beginning. Internally, you were cataloging every piece of evidence they handed you in their panic. Every desperate move confirmed that the control they believed they held had never been real. Control borrowed from someone else's compliance is not actual control, it is a loan. The moment the lender stops lending, the debt comes due immediately. They had been operating on your tolerance as though it were an unlimited resource. They found out it had a firm ceiling, and when a chosen one closes that door, it closes permanently. No grace period, no renegotiation, no pathway back in. The case was complete, and you were ready to move. You've probably noticed, a lot of Chosen One channels on YouTube have stopped publishing. Videos pulled, voices silenced. The mainstream media is cracking down on us, but we will not give up our voice. That's exactly why I'm putting you onto something real, Destiny Engine. I built this because I was done watching Chosen Ones get dragged through betrayal, isolation and attacks, while their enemies strutted around unchecked. I want to help you accelerate the speed of your divine justice and step fully into your purpose. And the beauty of it, you don't even have to lift a finger. Destiny Engine takes their downfall and flips it into your rise. This isn't another meditation app. It's declassified consciousness technology, the same mind programming tools your enemies once used to install fear, competition and scarcity, re-engineered to restore your sovereignty and align you with the cooperative, upgraded operating framework. Centralite's personalized sequences mapped to your divine purpose. The hardest thing you'll do is put on headphones, press play and watch your enemies keep digging their own grave. Join Destiny Engine to support your favorite channels and use it for your own rise. It's a 360 win. Start your Destiny Engine for $1 today and turn everything they did to break you into fuel for your rise. Link in the description. They crossed that line. Of course they did, because people operating from that level of arrogance always do. They had grown so comfortable in the belief that they had you contained that they stopped being careful. They stopped measuring. They made a move that answered every remaining question and removed every last reason to wait. When it happened, something occurred inside you that had nothing to do with emotion. It was colder than anger. It was quieter than grief. It was more permanent than anything they had managed to trigger before. It was not a break. It was a lock, a door closing from the inside, in the stillness of your own spirit, requiring no audience and no announcement. The word was simply, enough. Not enough. Now I will retaliate. Not enough. Now I will expose everything. Just enough. As in, everything that could possibly be given to this situation has been given. Every door of redemption has been opened and walked past. The answer is now undeniably clear, and you choose yourself. What they had been preparing for, the explosion, the breakdown, the dramatic confrontation they were poised to reframe in their favor, never came. What arrived instead was something they had no preparation for at all, and that something was, quietly, the most powerful move you had made across the entire situation. The enough moment rarely feels the way people imagine it will. It is not immediate relief, and it is not triumph. It sits closer to grief meeting clarity. You grieve the version of the situation you had genuinely hoped for, the one where the care was mutual, where the grace you extended was actually received. You grieve that honestly, briefly, and without shame, and then clarity moves in and takes up permanent residence. There is nothing left to hope for, and nothing left to wonder about. The peace that follows is something the outside world often misreads as coldness or as a change in character. What actually happened is that you finished mourning something already gone and stepped fully, without apology, into the reality of what is. That is not coldness. That is the Chosen One's relationship with truth. clear-eyed, steady, and completely unwilling to perform an attachment that has already fully expired. You withdrew, not with anger, not with a prepared speech, not with any of the spectacle they had readied themselves to manage and spin. You simply and completely pulled back the energy they had been quietly depending on. You stopped being available in the ways that had formed the invisible foundation of their entire operation. And in that withdrawal, that sovereign, unhurried, absolute pulling back, the structure they had built came down. It had only ever stood because of you, your patience, your presence, your consistent showing up. The moment those were removed, there was nothing left underneath, just the hollow frame of a game with no one inside it anymore. They reached out and you were measured in return. They pushed and you were unmoved. They ran every remaining tool they had, the guilt trip, the sudden display of warmth, the accusation that you had changed, the invented crisis meant to pull you back into range. Then every time, what they received was the same thing, the composed, clear-eyed response of someone who has made a final decision and is simply not available to reverse it. That composure did more damage than any explosion could have. The most unsettling discovery for someone who spent an entire season trying to provoke your chaos is that your calm runs deeper than everything they deployed against you combined. They had built their entire approach on the belief that they controlled the tempo, that they decided when and how you responded. You dissolved that belief without raising your voice or making a single dramatic move. You had always controlled the tempo. They had simply misread your patience as weakness for so long that they lost sight of what patience actually is. Patience is dominance with a longer runway. Every false narrative they had constructed required your emotional reaction to remain coherent. Without that reaction, the stories began contradicting themselves internally. The version told in one conversation started conflicting with the version told in another. Managing the gap between what was said and what was true demands constant energy, and without the ongoing project of tracking your responses, the construction began collapsing from the inside. The mask, with no performance left to hold it in place, simply fell, not because you tore it off, but because without you in the equation, there was nothing left holding it up. You did not expose them. You left, and in the space created by your departure, the truth surfaced exactly the way it always does, when interference is finally removed, naturally, completely, and right on schedule. The part that truly unnerved them was this: you did not carry the look of someone who had just won a fight. You carried the look of someone who had simply moved forward. Your composed continuation sent them one of two possible messages: either none of it had ever truly reached you, or you are something they fundamentally do not have the framework to understand. Both of those conclusions unsettled them deeply, and one of them was completely true. Every single thing done to you built something in you that was never part of their plan. Every attempt to weaponize your trust sharpened your ability to detect inauthenticity before it fully surfaces. You learned through sustained pressure, through being repeatedly told that what you sensed was inaccurate and what you perceived was exaggerated, to trust your internal signal over any external presentation. That ability is now iron. No carefully constructed narrative can override what your spirit communicates to you. They tried to cut you off from your own truth. Instead, they made your connection to it the most unshakable thing about you. Every attempt to isolate you deposited something equally specific: the ability to be genuinely whole in your own company. You discovered who you actually are when no one is around and nothing needs to be performed. You found out what you truly think, what you honestly value, what you actually believe when no external voice is filling the silence. That kind of self-knowledge is rare. It is the reason you are now impossible to control through loneliness, because you are complete on your own. And a person who is complete on their own is by definition free. Every attempt to exploit your faith refines something in you that cannot be manufactured in comfortable seasons, a spiritual discernment so precise that you can sense the intention behind someone's words before those words finish leaving their mouth. You develop the ability to distinguish between people carrying genuine purpose and people carrying a polished performance. That distinction becomes clear to you quickly, almost effortlessly now, in a way it simply was not before. They were sharpening that capacity in you while attempting to use you as a target. You came out of everything they put you through not diminished, sharper, more anchored, more clear about what is real, what is yours, and what you were placed here to do. That version of you was built by them, by accident, while they were trying to prevent it. And that is something they will always have to live with. Every accusation they had aimed at you suddenly had no surface to stick to. Every false story started developing structural problems, because maintaining a story built on distortion requires constant energy, tracking which version was told to which person, staying consistent across separate conversations, managing the growing distance between what was claimed and what was actually true. Without the ongoing project of monitoring your reactions and adjusting their narrative accordingly, that construction started fracturing from the inside. People who had received two different accounts of the same situation started placing those accounts side by side. Contradictions surfaced on their own, with no assistance from you. You did not orchestrate any of it, you simply left. And in the absence of a target, the architect was finally alone with what they had actually built. The people around you observed how you moved through the aftermath. They watched you remain composed. They watched you continue building, continue showing up, continue demonstrating through consistent action who you actually are. Over time, without a single public defense from you, the gap between who you were described as being and who you were actually being became something no one could continue to overlook. Truth does not require a campaign. It requires time and people willing to observe honestly. You gave it both. Meanwhile, all the energy that had previously been directed outward, the projection, the blame, the constructed grievance aimed at you, had nowhere left to land once you removed yourself from the equation. So it returned to its source. Living inside the chaos you yourself have created is an entirely different experience from projecting it outward onto someone else. You were free and moving forward. They were inhabiting exactly what they had built, and no amount of narrative management could bridge the distance between those two realities. That is not your concern, that is their reckoning. But it is completely your vindication, quiet, real, and arriving exactly on schedule. While the unraveling was occurring on their side, while the distance between you and that entire chapter of your life continued to grow, you were building. Not to make a statement, not to perform a comeback for anyone watching from the sidelines, but because when the noise finally clears and the path opens, chosen ones build. It is simply what they do. It is what they were made to do. What you were building grew, quietly at first, the way anything genuinely rooted always begins, then steadily, then in ways that became impossible to overlook, not because you were broadcasting your progress, but because it was grounded in something true. It was constructed on the actual reality of who you are, tested, refined, and clear, not on performance, not on strategy, and not on the need for external confirmation from anyone. Before the fire, some of what you were building still carried a quiet trace of wanting to be acknowledged by the very people who had underestimated you. That desire is understandable, but it is also a tether. It keeps part of your energy quietly connected to people you are actively rising above. After the fire, that tether burned away. What you are building now is not a message addressed to anyone who once doubted you. It is simply the fullest possible expression of what you were placed here to do. The difference between building to prove something and building to become something is the difference between a structure designed for an audience and one built to actually last. Your discernment also changed permanently. When someone's words and their energy do not match, you feel it immediately and you trust that feeling without negotiating against yourself. That means everyone who enters your life now has to be genuinely aligned in order to remain. The ones who are, the ones who recognize what you carry without requiring an explanation, who honor your boundaries without testing them, those relationships are irreplaceable. And the quality of that kind of connection is something that only becomes available after the kind of refinement you have been through. They planted you thinking they were burying you. What grew from that ground is the version of you standing here right now, whole, clear, and built on a foundation they could never access and therefore could never corrupt. Your power was never sourced from them, it was never sustained by their recognition, fueled by their attention, or dependent on their applause in any form. When they withheld validation, when they deliberately overlooked your growth, downplayed your wins, and maintained a posture of pointed unimpressedness, they were operating on a specific assumption that your confidence needed their input to survive. They believed their silence would make you shrink. They believed withholding would send you back to them, looking for permission to continue. You kept going, because the power they were attempting to switch off was never connected to them in the first place. It comes from the part of you that was formed before any of these people entered your life. It lives in the knowing beneath every external circumstance, the quiet, settled, unshakable knowing of who you are, what you carry, and what you are here to do. No one gave that to you, which means no one holds the authority or the ability to remove it. You crowned yourself, not in arrogance, in sovereignty, in the bone-deep understanding that you do not need another person to confirm what has already been established within you. You stopped shrinking to fit rooms that were not designed to hold you. You stopped seeking permission from people who held no real authority to grant it. You stepped into what was already yours, quietly and without needing to make an announcement about it. That is what sovereignty looks like when it lives in a person. It is not a feeling that comes and goes. It is a consistent behavior. It shows up in walking into a room without the pull to scan it for approval, without the instinct to adjust your energy based on who is present or what they might think, without the performance of a more palatable version of yourself. You arrive as yourself, and the room does the adjusting. It shows up in making decisions from your own clarity, rather than from what will be most comfortable for the people around you. It shows up in being genuinely unbothered, not performing unbotheredness, but actually inhabiting it, because you have already lived through the thing others hold up as a threat, and it did not end you. Their disapproval cannot diminish something whose worth was never dependent on their approval. They tried to build dependency on something they controlled. What they created instead was your freedom from needing anything they had to offer. Real resolution in a chosen one's story does not arrive loudly. It does not look like a dramatic public moment where justice walks in and everyone sees the truth simultaneously. That is not how it actually works. Real resolution is quieter than that and far more permanent. It looks like waking up and feeling peace in the room before the day has even started. It looks like your purpose being clear and your direction being lit, and the life you are actually living having grown so real, so aligned with what you were made for, that what was done to you in that previous season feels like something from a chapter of a book you have already closed and set down. It looks like your standards no longer being available for negotiation, not in a rigid or brittle way that cannot hold space for genuine human complexity, but in the way that a person who has truly paid the cost of overriding their own discernment never fully overrides it again. You know what that compromise costs. You have paid that price. And now, when something in a situation does not align, when the energy in the room does not match what is being said, when a familiar pattern starts forming, you trust what you feel immediately, without arguing yourself out of it, and without waiting for more evidence than you already have. You move cleanly, without the guilt that used to hold you in place long past the expiration of the truth. People feel it, not because you are performing anything, but because there is genuinely nothing left to perform. You are simply and completely yourself. And being fully yourself, after everything you have been through, is a settled, certain, unhurried kind of force that communicates something no amount of posturing ever could. You do not need anything from a space that you cannot provide for yourself, and that reality registers in people before a single word is spoken. The people who are genuinely meant to be in your life recognize what you carry immediately. The ones who are also building something real, who are also moving from purpose, who are also done with anything that does not honor their spirit, they feel what you carry and they move toward it naturally. The ones who were hoping to find your old accessibility without your new sovereignty feel it too, and they remove themselves without needing to be asked. That is the resolution. Not a perfect life, a real one. Built on truth, filtered through fire, and expanding in ways that are only possible because you held through every single thing that tried to make you stop. You walked in carrying your light, open, genuine, warm by nature, and someone looked at that light and made a calculation. Easy target. Hold that image one final time, because here is what you could not see then, and can now see with absolute clarity. The moment they decided to come for you was the moment they sealed their own outcome. Not because their approach was poorly built, they were thorough in their own limited way. They sealed the outcome in the very first moment, when they looked at a chosen one and saw a target instead of a force, when they saw patience and called it passivity, when they saw someone operating in an entirely different dimension of the game and tried to beat them with moves designed for a much smaller version of it. You were never in their game. That is the truth that reframes this entire story. You were always playing something larger, something longer, something so far outside the scope of what they were calculating against that every move they made was ultimately irrelevant to where your life was already heading. While they were obsessed with winning the short game, control, domination, claiming the moment, you were living inside the long game. Purpose, alignment, legacy, the kind of life that does not peak in a single confrontation, but builds steadily until it becomes impossible to deny. The long game always wins. Not loudly, not quickly, but completely, and every single time. Here is what distinguishes the long game from patience alone. It is a fundamentally different relationship with time and with outcomes. People who play the short game need to win right now, and that urgency is exactly what makes them predictable, sloppy, and willing to take risks that someone operating from security would never take. You do not move from urgency, you move from certainty. You understand that something built on truth outlasts something built on performance, not sometimes, but always, without exception. So you are not in a hurry, and you cannot be rushed, and that steady composure is itself a form of dominance they had no response for. The confidence you carry today is not the product of achievement or external recognition or any validation from outside yourself. It is the product of going through the exact thing that was designed to finish you and discovering that you are still here, still intact, still moving, still becoming. That discovery produces something that cannot be purchased or performed. It produces the knowledge, settled deep into who you are, that you are something that cannot be permanently stopped. And once you carry that knowledge in your bones, you move through the world from an entirely different foundation. You stop seeking permission. You stop waiting for circumstances to align perfectly around you. You stop making yourself smaller to accommodate people who were never meant to walk beside you into your next season. You walked in and someone circled your warmth as though it were prey. You were already watching from the moment they arrived. You ran your own quiet evaluation while they believed they were running theirs. You held your silence while they unraveled inside it. You withdrew and observed everything they had constructed collapse the moment your energy was no longer there to sustain it. You allowed the truth to surface entirely on its own, and then you built quietly, precisely, from a foundation they never had access to, the life that was always waiting for you on the other side of everything they put you through. Same story, completely opposite outcomes, and the line between those two outcomes was not luck, timing, or any external advantage. It was one thing and one thing only. You knew who you were underneath all the pressure, and that knowing could not be taken from you, could not be destabilized, and could not be stopped. The person who thought they had found easy prey was standing at the threshold of the greatest miscalculation of their life. And you were already the force they had no category for, already the chosen one, who was going to rise from this and make every step of that rising look like it was always inevitable, because it was, it always was. Chosen ones do not explain themselves, they reign. Welcome to your throne. You did not just survive what was designed to end you. You were forged in it, anointed through it, and sent out from it as something sharper, more grounded, and more unstoppable than anything that walked into that fire. Now go.